have a major announcement right now. So the whole month is White History Month from now on. Happy White History Month.
It's White History Month. I'm gonna celebrate with my friends. It's White History Month. So be sure to tell everyone. There will always be different months to celebrate. This month's gonna be White History.
Amazing! It's White History Month. Happy White History Month.
Amazing!
July just feels white. Isn't that amazing? Amazing! We are celebrating our 7th year of White History Month. Congratulations. It doesn't get any better than this. Can you imagine 7 years have gone by? July just feels white. And so today is the kickoff of July White History Month. Happy White History Month. Vacation time, reflection time, appreciation time, all those good things. Amazing. So happy 4th of July. Happy White History Month. I'm Jesse Lee Peterson, rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. And we are also uniting the races with truth instead of dividing them with lies. So today is the kickoff, first day of White History Month in July, 7 years of celebration. And I personally could not think of a better person to have with us today, a special guest, a mighty man of valor, Congressman Steve King of Iowa. And I've had him here before. I've had him on the HakeReport.com before. And we're going to give you his information, website, and everything as we move here. Congressman Steve King served in the United States Congress for 18 years, from 2003 until 2021. He is an author of the book, Walking Through the Fires. I've been tried in the fire, and the flames get so hot, I can't see the sky for the smoke in my eyes. And he's been walking through the fire. And we're going to talk to him about that. My fight for the heart and soul of America. Congressman Steve King, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me on this morning, Jesse. I've had a few minutes of entertainment here listening to you start this day out for White History Month, and I'm sitting here with a pretty good tan, so I kind of...
I couldn't think of a better American to start this month off with White History Month. I was 7 years. I really do appreciate you being here. I have a nice little intro I want to play before we get to our discussion. And this clip is from the New York Times, 2019. And this was before Trump. There was a Steve King. Watch this.
It looked like this, 10 feet wide, 13 and a half feet tall. They'd construct itself to be a 12-foot finished wall just like that.
That's Representative Steve King.
We do that with livestock all the time.
Pitching the idea of building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, more than a decade before it became President Donald Trump's central immigration policy.
The wall's going to get built, folks. Just in case anybody has any question, the wall's going to get built.
King has been a Republican member of Congress from Iowa. He's made a name for himself as a hardline opponent of illegal immigration.
He may be the world's most conservative human being.
Right
It's
on.
our job here in this Congress to decide who will be citizens, not someone in a foreign country that can sneak into the United States and have a baby and then go home with a birth certificate. Preventing babies from being born is not medicine. That's not constructive to our culture and our civilization. If we let our birth rate get down below the replacement rate, we're a dying civilization.
Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
And white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world. That's all of Western civilization.
Amazing. Representative King, we spoke at AFPAC 3 back in 2021 along with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others. What happened? This is like my America is gone now for the most part. You were leading the way about the wall. You were trying to put America first. You wanted to make it better. And they didn't like that. What went wrong in America that we are where we are now?
Well, they've taken down our culture, Jesse, and in the foundation of all of this, and in my studies of history, it always amazed me that they didn't address religion. It was, the Ottomans attacked the Western Europe,
Yeah.
but they didn't say this was Muslims versus Christianity, for example. But the core of what happens in the world is the culture and the foundation of civilization. And you heard me say that Western civilization is everywhere where Christianity has provided the foundation for it.
Yeah.
That's our values, our work ethic. It's the pillars of American exceptionalism also, most of which are in the Bill of Rights. The freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, bear arms. You can go on through the whole Bill of Rights. And then you add to that the rule of law, free enterprise capitalism, and understand that it's a nation that's founded on Christian principles. They went after all of that. And if I take this to a thing, it is a human nature that's foretold in the Bible. Not just good and evil, but in the Catholic Bible, in the Book of Wisdom, I write this in my book, Walking Through the Fire, and it's an insight that came to me alone. I haven't picked it up from anybody's instruction, excuse me. But it is. They write in there that it foretells the future crucifixion of Jesus. And the plotters, and so they say it this way. This is the way it reads in the Book of Wisdom. And it says, "Let us beset the just one." They're speaking of Jesus. "Let us beset the just one, for he is obnoxious to us. He sets himself against our doings and charges us with violations of our training." Now, that's kind of like
That's amazing.
Jesus was the guilty conscience of the people who called him the just ones who were set to crucify him. Now, if you take that quote out of the Book of Wisdom and change the singular pronoun that refers to Jesus, the just one, as the just ones, as meaning the just people in the world,
Yeah.
and I'm going to apply that to people that carry, I'll say, Christian values, regardless of their religion. And so now it reads, "Let us beset the just ones, for they are obnoxious to us." They charge us with they set themselves against our doings and charge us with violations of our training. In other words, when the virtuous world of Western civilization has the envy of the world, Western civilization is the envy of the world, and they want to take it down because it's the evil within them. And so they've done so through our schools, even through our churches. Every institution in America has been corrupted to a degree, and some completely corrupted. And here we sit today trying to restore our culture and our civilization without quite understanding what's happened to us, and we watched it happen. I saw it happen beginning years ago, as you said.
Yeah. Christianity, in my opinion, is the best religion on this side of heaven. And we are a Christian nation. We were founded and created because of that. As you said, one of the best nations in the world. How did the Christians go to sleep and didn't see what evil people were trying to do? What happened with the Christian men and women who were true Christians back then that they allowed it to happen? Because good can always defeat evil if you understand and can see what's really going on. Were the Christians asleep or what?
Well, I think that they were asleep to a degree. There's no question about that, I don't think. But each of these institutions were targeted. Some of this is the communist Marxist strategy, the Cloward-Piven strategy, to create chaos and break down our government and put us into debt. Other things
Yeah.
happened. The flower children of the 60s, and that's exactly my generation, although I wasn't among them. Uh, they turn on, tune in, drop out, um, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So we had free love, promiscuity. It amazed me that I first heard of birth control pills in about 1965, and that was then things started to happen. So women, for the first time, had a contraception that allowed them to be as promiscuous as they chose to be.
Yeah.
And with all of those options that were there, different methods of contraception that were right in front of everybody, they had to add abortion to that to kill the babies on top of it. And so they broke down the value of sacred human life. They broke down the value of monogamy and marriage. They went after all of these institutions that anchor us together. And the force of evil was enough temptation for a lot of useful idiots to say, we're going to walk away from our culture for now because it's fun. And what happened is it poisoned the entire civilization.
Yeah. And so one other question about that. Men at one time and during those days when all that stuff first started that I'm aware of, men were stronger than they are today. And they were leading the way. There were good women who loved the roles that, that men were the leader. How did the men become weak and allow those women to come up with this abortion stuff? And what made the men say okay to the women?
Well, one thing is the women began teaching the boys not to be aggressive, don't fight, don't be, suppress whatever testosterone drives you to be aggressive. That was going on in our culture. I'll just give you a narrative here from a couple of weeks ago. I've got a number of grandchildren that have been playing baseball this summer, baseball and softball, boys and girls. And the one is about an 8 or 9 year old. I won't give his name here on the air.
Right.
But he was catching. He's a good kid too. But he was catching and he got hit by a ball pretty hard, and he went down and started to roll on the ground. And I could see where it hit him. And he was going to be all right. And I'm behind the plate there, and I just said, "All right, shake it off, get up, let's go." And
Yeah.
that was all fine. And then when I said, "We're raising men here," that's when I
Nice.
got pushback from the moms. They don't want to hear that.
They hate that word.
Yeah. And so, but I've lined up my grandchildren, Jesse, and I said when they're little on, from like 5 years old or so, and say, "What are you, a boy or a girl?" Well, whichever they answer, I'm a boy. Are you going to grow up to be a man or a woman? Oh, man. I'm teaching them what
Right
they're going to
on.
grow up to be because we have to now.
Right on.
They've broken down the roles of masculinity and femininity, and I'll take you clear back to 1998. We passed a law in the Iowa Senate, where I was then, with the Defense of Marriage Act. And when bill was written by leadership or wherever the powers that be, and when it came in front of my eyes, I looked at that where it said, "Marriage shall only be between one man and one woman." And I brought an amendment and successfully in Iowa law today, even though the courts have overturned it, it says marriage shall be only between one male and one female.
Right.
And I told them, I don't want to argue about what a man is or what a woman is. That was 1998. And what was it, 2 years ago? We have a Supreme Court justice that doesn't know what a woman is. It takes a biologist to do that.
And
They've scrambled our minds, Jesse. And you look back at the Declaration of Independence, and we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And they meant all men when they wrote that, not 3/5 or whatever
Right.
that number was. They meant all men. And it was the South that negotiated that. They didn't want to let them vote. They just wanted to count them in their representation. But then we've changed that now, where it's men and women, as it should be. But we're created equal. And but it doesn't say all genders of all kinds, the entire alphabet plus an infinity.
Right.
It just says men, and then we added women. And when you look at the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, it doesn't say gender, it says sex. We're going to protect people unbiased with regard to sex.
Yeah.
Sex is a binary definition. They added the word gender about 1998 in Iowa too, and I sued Governor Vilsack successfully over that, because I argued this, that the gender is in your head and sex is below the belt. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
And when they got that word gender in there, now when I do fill out my medical forms, they say, "What's your gender?"
I know.
And I refuse to answer my gender.
Yeah.
My dog doesn't know what gender is because it's in their head.
That is so true. I've noticed. Oh, let me ask this. I noticed that when you were a congressman and you were involved, and you were standing up for the country, you were standing for family, you were standing for what is right. There were not many people in Congress or the Senate who were working with you. And I noticed that now that Donald Trump is back, there are not many, when he was there were not many men and women who were willing to stand with him. Why is that always one or two who's willing to stand, whereas most are not? What's that about?
Well, I just think that there's a huge lack of courage, Jesse. And when I've been, of course, in the public eye for a long time, I've been the number one target in the nation for months on end.
Yeah.
And so when you face that and you look at how others react to it, it's, for example, when they had their political lynch party on me in 2000, started in 2019 and continued for a long time.
Yeah.
When that happened, there would be, if I'd be out on the floor of Congress and my friends didn't want to come over and talk when the C-SPAN cameras were on. It didn't mean nobody would, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And but if it was back behind in the cloakroom, that was a little different. And if it was my breakfast that I hosted on Wednesday mornings as chairman of the Conservative Opportunity Society, they showed up just the same as they always did. But so that people add things to association, the media, and force and squeeze answers out of them, and then once they get them on record, they're stuck with that. Lee Terry, former congressman from Nebraska, and a pretty good guy on balance, came up to me one day. This would be maybe a dozen years ago or more, and he said, "I just thought I'd come and tell you that the press asked me a question about you, and I had to answer them this way. I'm coming to apologize, but I want to let you know it straight up, man to man." And
wow.
yeah, it's like he knew it was wrong, and he came to me and apologized. He knew it was wrong when he said it, but he had to say it for the media, I guess. That's what's his conclusion.
What a mess. What was it like? I remember some of the things, seeing you go through a lot, and you were standing alone for the most part. What was it like at the time, if you can remember, when you were going through that and you had to stand alone? What were you thinking and feeling?
Well, Jesse, I always knew the Lord was with me. I had read enough of other people's struggles and to know that he was with me, and I believe that and I still believe I was being prepared for something else. So that was a consolation within me and within my soul, I will say. I'm trying to do my job for those last 2 years too, when I've been completely ostracized.
Yeah.
And when the new freshman class came in, actually they came in essentially the same week that this all came down on me. And I couldn't even go over and introduce myself to them because it would look like I was trying to find a friend when I didn't have any. And I didn't have hardly any friends. Louis Gohmert stood with me and a few others, but not the rest of them, not publicly. Louis did publicly. So I would just stand on the back of the House chamber and that brass railing back there and just kind of lean on that, listen to the things, and do whatever else. And people would walk by me and they'd tap me on the back or whisper and just say, "You got the shaft, King," and on they go. But they wouldn't stop and look up the C-SPAN camera and smile. And so they're afraid of the criticism. And I've always been the other way, that you better say the truth.
Yeah.
I don't want to be caught in some trap where I avoided a confrontation or whether I walked away from a principle that needed to be defended. That wasn't my job. My job is to uphold the Constitution and defend those principles that made America great, and still what's left of them keep America great.
Amazing. I noticed that men who stand up, they always, for the most part, have to stand alone. It just seemed to be a spiritual rule or principle, because I realized that most people are not going to get on that straight and narrow path that leads to salvation, that leads to excellence in life, because it's a hard path to take. And when you take that path, you do have to stand alone, and you must be as Christ did, you must be willing to stand alone, and it'll be okay as long as you are willing to stand alone for what is right.
Well, and Jesse, a couple things about leadership. And first of all, when I've come from, my background is essentially a ditch digger. I started doing construction work down in the hole and worked my way through, started a construction business in 1975, and then on to Congress. And I looked around me, and here are these people that are doctors and lawyers and judges and
Yeah.
professionals with degrees from elite universities. This is the cream of the crop when they arrive there. They really are high quality people, high quality education at least. And so I came from a different way. I say it's my PhD from the University of Hard Knocks. But I was watching folks as they came in. I said, I don't know how many 9 freshman classes come in. What separates people that have gone through the same filter, a similar filter, a similar crucible? They arrive in a place like that. Some of them rise above the others, and others drift off into the back benches. And one of those is people that arrive at the front. They trust their instincts. There's not time to do a poll, evaluate, go around and ask for a consensus. If you believe in something, go after it.
Yes.
And so Michele Bachmann was one of those that really let me see that as in someone else. And then
I remember Michele Bachmann too.
She's a wonderful and brilliant person.
Yeah, I spoke at events with her before.
And then the
she's been here before. But go ahead.
I would expect. Sorry. I would expect, Jesse, that the next thing is that trusting your instincts when it's time to lead. If the hill has to be taken, don't look back and say, "Are you guys all with me?" You got to just go.
Absolutely,
just go.
Absolutely, man. What now? I got to ask. Now that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution no longer exist for the most part, they have taken it away, and they are taking it away daily. Is there any way that America can come back, return, since we don't have the Declaration of Independence, we don't have the Constitution, we don't control the courts and judges and all that anymore, and God is not, except for inside a few individuals, God is not around in the schools and the government and play. Is it possible to return?
Well, we have to believe it's possible, Jesse, and it's a difficult hill to look up at and think we can just take it. But I'm seeing some good signs around the country. One of the states has passed legislation that requires the Bible to be taught in their public schools. I don't remember which state that was. It just came in front of my eyes here a few days ago.
Yeah, I remember that, but I don't remember which state as well, but I do remember it.
But it's a good sign. And we're seeing people that pull their children out of the schools that have been corrupting the moral values and homeschooling. You're seeing parochial schools increase. We've got a school choice legislation that's passed in Iowa. Some other signs along the way, that would be Roe versus Wade has been overturned 2 years ago. Just a week a week behind us was the second anniversary. That's a good sign. You're seeing states that are defending life. We've got something like 15 or maybe 16 states that have a heartbeat law. And I wrote that for the national level and went to the states to promote it. And certainly wrote the bill in Iowa, which was just upheld by the Iowa Supreme Court here this week. Well, last week it would be now.
Right on.
So there's good signs, but we've got to rebuild at the local level. And I hear people say, I give up on Congress, I give up on the federal government, but I'm going to pay my attention to my family, my business, my job, my neighborhood, my church. And I think we have to do all of those things, but we can't ignore the national side of this thing because they can so destroy our culture and civilization. It's been so completely evident with Biden as president, how much he's taken down.
Yeah.
So all of these pieces have to be pushed back again. And 7 or 8 years ago, I was warning that we were headed towards a civil war. And I got attacked for that, of course, but a lot of other folks have been saying that recently.
Yeah.
And I'd say instead that if we don't turn this back in some of the way that I've described, we're headed towards a revolution. That's different. That means that it's not geographically defined as clearly as what our history is of the Civil War, but instead it is the clash of the two political parties that have been so polarized, but the ideology of the two political parties, not necessarily Republicans versus Democrats. That clash, I don't know what form it takes. I don't know what might galvanize it. I want to avoid it, but I just think of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry that more or less, it set the stage for the attack on Fort Sumter and the Civil War. what happens in America, what could be our Bastille Day when things just get out of hand and people have had enough, then you throw caution to the wind. I hope it doesn't. I pray it doesn't. But I want this country put back together in our liberty. Thomas Jefferson let us know that liberty is worth some blood if you have to do that. We wouldn't have our country if they didn't believe otherwise.
Yeah, amazing. You remind me of my friend Bill Lockwood, of Patriot. What's Bill Lockwood website? Patriotic Pulpit. And you look like him, you remind me, and you sound like him, and he's as smart as you are. So I'm going to have to hook you guys up so you can be on his show. I bet that would be amazing.
I'd be happy to do that.
I'll let him know. I got to know this. I want to know this. On your website, steveking.com, you say your early life shaping, hold on, says your early life shaping you for battle.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? How did it happen? How did it shape you for the battle?
Well, I think just a lot of the struggles that I had gone through. First thing, my father was a manager of state police radio stations. He schooled me in the rule of law, and not only did I have a good, solid Christian upbringing, but the Constitution and the Constitution and the Code of Iowa were often on the kitchen table after supper at night. And my dad would coach me through that, and he would explain it pretty simply this way: the law, this Constitution is a supreme law of the land.
Yeah.
Nothing overrules this Constitution. And so if you don't like the laws that we have, here's the Iowa Code of Iowa, part of it anyway, then you only have a few choices. One of them is you're going to abide by the law. And if you think that law is an unjust law, then you can go lobby your legislator to change it or run for office. Those are the things you can do.
Yeah.
Live under the law or set about changing them. So that was part of it. And then free enterprise and history. One of the things with when he was in grade school, and he had a really tough upbringing. There's no question about that. But he was in grade school.
Hold that thought for me. Don't forget it. When I come back from the short break, we'll pick up right there. 888-7753-773. 888-77-JESSE. Quick break. Representative Steve King is with me. Amazing way to start White History Month. First day of White History Month. Back in a moment.
American symbols, our history, our culture has been torn asunder by BLM and Antifa and the left and the people that sat there complacently and let it happen. When they go after a former slave owner or a Confederate general or officer, I see that as an affront to the deal that was made between General Grant and General Lee at Appomattox. But when they went after George Washington's statue and Thomas Jefferson's statue, they were after the destruction of Western civilization and after the destruction of the American civilization.
Amazing. That was my guest, Reverend Congressman Steve King at AFPAC back in 2021 when we spoke, and it was an amazing talk. Tell the folk, before we get back into the conversation, tell the people how to get to your website, whatever you want to put out there.
Okay, well, my website is just steveking.com. And I've got a Twitter account, a couple of those. I think it's Steve King IA, at Steve King IA for Iowa. So that's it. I don't do a lot with my website anymore, but if they're interested in picking up a book, then you can buy a book over my website, Walking Through the Fire, and My Fight for the Heart and Soul of America, that tells a lot of this narrative. And I still got a few of those in my little warehouse left. So those that are ordered over my website at steveking.com, I personally autograph those and I ship them out with these loving hands right here. So
nice. So we were talking about how your early life, how it was sharpened for this battle. You were talking about your father at the time. Go ahead.
Yes, and he, as I said, just to refresh, he steeped me in the rule of law and respect for the Declaration and the Constitution, supreme law of the land, and abiding by the law. And every day he went to work, he was enforcing the law. But one of the things that I think he was required to memorize in grade school was the poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's called "The Concord Hymn," and most of you have heard it. But I just remembered parts of it from him telling me. But it starts out like this: By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. There the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world.
Amazing.
Now, I remember listening to him recite that poem to me. I don't know if I was on his knee or a little older than I must have been a little older. And I said, Dad, what happened to the bridge? Well, the poem actually tells you. Let's see. I looked it up here just a second while we're in the break. On this,
Okay.
the anyway. Oh, sure. The it says anyway in the poem. Oh, sure. And time the ruined bridge has swept down the dark stream which seaward creeps. Time the ruined bridge has swept. So the bridge was been washed away by the flood. And I asked my dad, Dad, did they rebuild that bridge? And he said, no, they haven't. I said, why not? He said they didn't need it anymore. Well, that always fascinated me. And some years ago, we made the trip over to Lexington and Concord, walked the greens at Lexington, and reviewed the battle that took place there. And then went on to Concord, and there they had rebuilt that bridge. And so it happened within the last, say, decade or so before I was there. But Dad never lived to see the bridge rebuilt. But I went to see it. That calling from my youth made me go there and stand there in awe of what happened when those embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. You can tell when I say that how much that means to me.
I
But the
can
history
tell.
of this country, patriots, faithful Christian patriots, stood up and put their lives on the line, their lives, their fortune, their sacred honor over and over again at great cost. And they did all of that, and we can't just clean our country up by
Yeah.
stop killing babies and cut down on crime, secure the border, get rid of the illegal drugs that are killing 100,000 young people every year. Every year, that's when um, that Santa Anna invaded Texas. He had somewhere between 5 and 7,000 troops. And we've got at least that number every night pouring into the United States of America to be met by the Biden welcome wagon. And it's a simple axiom, Jesse, is that when you bring someone in from a foreign culture, you're importing their culture with them.
Yeah.
And it's a big question to ask.
Yeah.
What do you bring to this country that has been so wholesome, so good, so law-abiding, so faithful? What do you bring from another culture that enhances this one? And if there's not a good answer to that, there's not a good reason to bring that person into America. We're doing it tens of millions of times, however.
That's amazing. I noticed that the Western world, which was founded by white men and built by white men with the grace of God, the help of God, right? And I noticed that there's a major attempt to get rid of white men like you, those who truly believe in God, those who are not afraid to speak up. They are trying daily to get rid of men like you. Are they doing that because they want to destroy the Western world? If they could get rid of the white Christian men, they would be able to bring the country down?
That's part of it. That is part of it. Going to the bigger picture of this, I mean, I've addressed the good versus the evil part of this.
Right.
But also, let me see if you can see it. It's anyway up behind me is a piece of the Berlin Wall, and I have that framed in here because it represents the single most significant historical event in my lifetime when that wall came down
Yeah.
November 9th of 1989, and that was a division between the free world and the communist, atheist, Marxist world. There's a book over here in this shelf. And in that book, it tells about how the Cold Warriors got around a table at the Army Navy Club in Washington, D.C. after the Soviet Union imploded to celebrate their victory in the Cold War. And let's see, Nitze, who was his first name escapes me for the moment, was the father of the mutually assured destruction strategy. He said, hold it, don't be so quick to celebrate. The world, this is where I'm getting to, the world will not tolerate a lone superpower. No one likes the big kid on the block, and soon you will see a formation come up against us that'll be comprised of China, Russia, a large Islamic country, and perhaps India. Now, look where we are today. That's been 1989, 1991, I believe, actually, that this took place. And here we are with that. So I'd say, okay, now look at the globe and all the pieces of history and culture that we can get into our heads.
Yeah.
We see Western civilization with the United States of America, the flagship for the fleet of Western civilization countries. If they can sink us, they can sink the whole fleet with ease. That's part of it. So we are Western civilization bonded together by the footprint of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And then you've got the communist world, the Marxist world, the atheist world, the class envy haters who kill hundreds of millions of people because they're only subjects of the state. That's the force that's lined up against us, bringing the Iran and the large Islamic states against us on that coalition. And the third piece of this thing is a significant one to know, and that's the World Economic Forum, the self-assigned gods of Davos, the masters of the universe who manipulate information and money and communications, and they believe they can manage the technology and control the capital to manage the world. And I know people like this, of course. So there's three forces out there, and the other two forces are trying to take down Western civilization, and we have to push back. If we lose, those two forces will fight each other, but we won't be around to see it.
Yeah.
And so that's, but we've got a legacy to celebrate coming into the 4th of July, and we need to pledge ourselves to those, pledge our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor to those values that were at the pen of Thomas Jefferson and in the minds of him and all those that signed it.
For people like me and others, people who are smarter than I am and younger than I am, we don't understand the depths of what you just said, the real depths of it. And so we're not being taught that in the schools, and rarely are they teaching that in the homes now. And if the young people don't understand the depths of what you just said, how will things turn around if they can't understand what's going on and who's controlling who and why they're doing it? How will things turn around for America if we don't understand what's really going on and who's driving the truck?
It's so hard to penetrate. And, I think about our history of the pastors that understood this during the Revolutionary War time. Had it not been for the pastors in the churches, they wouldn't have galvanized and mobilized the colonists to rise up against England. But they did. They stood there and they preached from the pulpit. Some of that's going on, but far less of it.
Yeah.
And there's intimidation factors too. Let's see. I have had priests tell me, well, we're not going to have anything political going on here in this church because we'll lose our not-for-profit status. No church has ever lost a not-for-profit status because of what a Johnson Amendment or executive order, I've forgotten which it was now. But no church has ever lost it, but yet they use that. And they run and hide. And then you see some pretty high-profile, I'll say, evangelical type pastors that have gone over to the left side and they use scripture against those principles that it's written for. So I want to see faithful families understand this, and we see some institutions that do it really well. Hillsdale is one of them, for example, that there's just not enough of it.
Right.
And I want to point out also that the Supreme Court has moved us in towards the right direction here. When they reversed the Chevron doctrine here just this past week, what day is it? Monday, right? That was something where the executive branch of government could pretty much do what they wanted with the laws that were passed, interpret them the way they wanted, and the court would give deference to the decisions of the bureaucrats. Well, I wrote legislation to reverse that myself back about 10 years ago and actually passed it off of the floor of the House of Representatives, and I couldn't get them to take it up in the Senate. But the Supreme Court has now stepped in on that. So that's a step in the right direction. It's going to reduce the influence of government. We'll have a lot of fights because of it. It'll reduce the influence. We're saving more lives, which means we're putting more value in those lives. And the people that are the most aggressive on that are in the pro-life group. They're the ones that are pushing and penetrating this. So it's a long haul. It took us a long time to get here.
Yeah.
Whether or not we come out of it, it's not going to be quick. And if we end up with a Bastille Day or a Harper's Ferry or somebody fires on Fort Sumter, we're in trouble. And it's going to be ugly and it's going to be bloody. And no one knows how it comes out.
What a mess. Joel Friday TV, he black. He want to know, why did you leave Congress?
Well, that's a that is a long story, but a lot of it is in my book. To summarize it, to boil it down, it's this: that I always stood up for what I believe to be right.
Yeah.
And when leadership would come to me and say, "We really need your vote on this because someone needs it to get reelected, or we can raise money," or if they seldom actually told the truth on that part, I would say, "I got to believe in it before I can vote for it." And so the whip that would come around usually comes around to twist some arms. They didn't, after a little while, they didn't even try to twist my arm. They just, "Well, where are you on this? You for it or are you against it?" And I always, so that was, and then when I saw them taking the money, that some of which I had raised and donated to the party, taking that money to weigh in California. Kevin McCarthy did this. There was a conservative military veteran entering into a primary for Congress out there, and there was a homosexual guy who was married or civil union anyway, to his partner, and they're spending some of my money for glossy flyers that showed these two men's hands holding hands with their wedding rings on them and smiling. And I ain't in on that
He's
anymore.
like, what the?
So they accused me of not being a team player. And I think I'm completely consistent with the Republican platform, and they are not.
Yeah.
But there were massive powers that wanted to get things done that I stood in the way of. They accused me of killing the amnesty bill in the Gang of Eights amnesty bill, where they had 68 votes for it in the Senate, 2013. Yeah, I did my best, and we succeeded. Nobody does anything alone, you know.
Right.
So they wanted open borders and cheap labor, and they wanted to kill babies, and they wanted same-sex people to get married. And I stood in the way of all those things and more. Wanted to balance the budget. But so I added up the things that caused them to get to that place. And I thought that I understood it when I wrote my book, and all the things in my book are true. And it adds up logically. But I left that a little bit hanging on so who called the hit. Because what they did is they did a media ambush on me, and I knew it was going to come. It just didn't come from the place I expected it to. And so when the other side, I'll just say they right now, the people that called the hit, when they learned that I understood their plot, the very next day I had a primary opponent. That's nearly 2 years in advance of the next election. Well, and then the following day, let's see, as soon as the day after they learned, late in the evening, they learned that I knew there was a plot afoot to unleash a nationwide media attack on me, and they were going to use anything that they could find to do it. And then the very next day, I had a primary opponent. And the day after that, the New York Times story hit with a misquote in it, and the whole country took that misquote and just amplified it like just a full-out barrage. And there was nothing that I could say or do that had any impact at all after that, except it gave him more reason to attack me. And so Kevin McCarthy, before he ever said a word to me, told the press he was going to kick me off of all of my committees.
Wow.
No member of Congress has ever survived that when it happened by their own party. And then this unfolded on a Wednesday, Thursday, and a Friday. And then Friday, about the 10th of January, 2019. And then on Sunday morning at 6:30 in the morning, Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff called my chief of staff and said, "Can we set up a meeting with your boss and my boss for Monday?" So she set that up. And that's when he went on the airwaves to say, "I'm going to kick," and that he was going to kick me off. He didn't say that day, but in the green room, he was quoted as saying he was going to kick me off all my committees before we talked. Anyway, so that unfolded in that fashion. And then the next day, so Monday we had the meeting, closed the door, knock down, drag out. The next day, they had a resolution on the floor that essentially condemned me for a statement that said white nationalism, what is it now? White supremacy, white nationalism, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? They just put a comma in there, so like I was asked, that it presumed that I was saying that how did any of this language become offensive? I've always known what white supremacy or what it was, but Western civilization had become offensive, and I'd been talking about that, and in the press, I was quoted as saying those things in the press. They clammed it all together, and then when I say you needed a long hyphen there, not a comma, no one would listen to that at all. So I had to go down to the floor of Congress on Tuesday when they brought that resolution, and with people taking turns beating up on me, walk down there, take the podium, and turn around and face them all and tell them all exactly what was what. And I don't know if much of anything of that speech got quoted in the press, but all of that's in the record, and every bit of it's true. So, but now, Jesse, I've made this a long story, but it's a lot shorter than the real story.
Yes.
Anyway, what I have learned, I understood this a little bit less than a year ago. All of these things that I've said about open borders and abortion, all they added up. But the biggest reason was out of Davos and the World Economic Forum and some vulture capitalists here in the United States, the global warming folks put into the debt. Let's see, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a misnomer we know that Biden signed a couple of years ago. It ends up being hundreds of billions of dollars of carbon credits. And these carbon credits are driven by the global warming ideology. But the largest mass of the purest form of CO2 known anywhere in the world comes out of our ethanol plants here, just dissipates into the air and helps us grow corn. But they set a price, $85 a metric ton. If you can capture that and sequester it, pump it down into the ground near the oil fields. That has driven these investors to try to set up a quasi-monopoly to build a pipeline to connect these 57 ethanol plants all through Iowa and some Nebraska, South Dakota, up to North Dakota. Well, all right, that's a massive thing, but what they can't do is build that pipeline without condemning private property, eminent domain, a solid constitutional principle in the Fifth Amendment. And this is some of the best farmland in the world. People lived on it, have lived on it for 5 and 7 generations. And I knew and know they're not going to get out of the way and accept a check no matter what it is, because that's their life, their livelihood, and it's a legacy for their children. So we're doing battle to protect these property rights. This was in a significant part. I was set up because they knew that if I'm a seated member of Congress representing the lion's share of all those ethanol plants, that I would be in every county seat town reminding them what the Constitution says to protect their property rights. Not only is this a boondoggle of economic and scientific proportions, but it destroys the right to property in the United States of America if they succeed. And that, if you destroy the right to property, then you've destroyed free enterprise itself. So it's another attack on Western civilization. I'm right in the middle of it here. They've been planning this since 2011, and I finally, my light came on last year sometime. I was a little embarrassed I didn't figure it out sooner.
What a mess. So are you on the short list for President Trump, VP?
No, I don't think so.
You should be.
I'll tell you, my choice would be Vivek Ramaswamy. And some of the trouble that Trump has had is that he would give orders and then his subordinates would just ignore him and they wouldn't carry it out. Yeah. Vivek would chase them down and come up with new ways to make sure that they follow through on that.
Amazing.
Brilliant, insightful leader.
Right on. I do want to say this because of time. You say we have an illegal alien invasion, and I noticed that illegals are making anchor babies. I want to know, will we ever end birthright citizenship here in America?
Well, I wish I could say yes to that. And I don't know, it gets harder. For every anchor baby born, it gets harder to end birthright citizenship. But if you look around the world, I don't know there's another country in the world that just gives citizenship because you happen to be on its real estate when you were born. I remember dealing with the Dominican Republic and the Haitians, and the Dominican Republic. They were in my office, the Dominicans, because they wanted a constitutional analysis for their constitution because the practice had begun of Haitians coming across the border to have babies and turning them into Dominican citizens, and they had finally ended up with a decision in the Dominican Republic Supreme Court that automatic citizenship was unconstitutional. And so that practice was, as I understand it, at least, stopped in the Dominican Republic. Well, if they can do that in the Dominican Republic, and now then, let's see, the people on the other side, they'll say, well, we have a Supreme Court decision, Kim Wong-Ark, he was of Chinese descent, and that case is not on point. This is a practice that has begun, and it just grew and grew and grew. But it's not law, it's not constitutional, it's a practice. And a president can begin to reverse this, but it'd be a long, hard slog to do it, and it would be litigated in the Supreme Court. And we really secure the border, and I hear Trump say deport every illegal I'm for that too.
Me
Because
too.
yeah, if you make exceptions, then what you're doing is you're subordinating the rule of law to the exception. That's how it works.
Tell the folks, we're running out of time here. Tell the folks how to get your book, your website, or whatever you want to get real fast.
Yes, just go to my website, steveking.com, and click the button, and that'll place the order there, and I will get that. It'll show up in my email, and I'll sit at this desk, and I'll autograph that book and ship it off. With
Thank
my
you.
loving
Thank you so much. You made my day. Amazing.
and mine. Thanks, Jesse.
All right, buddy. Back in a moment, folks. 2 more hours to go. Representative Steve King. Back in a moment. Easy.